Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. And thank you very much to the organizers for inviting myself and the panel to speak today on Africa's capital market investment climate. We do have a distinguished panel today, and we would be covering several dimensions, Pan-African capital market landscape, just to give you an idea of the context, and then specific issues around the investment climate in Africa, and then initiatives underway to build liquidity and drive increased trading volumes on the continent. With regards to context, the IMF global growth forecast is actually scheduled to be downgraded from 3.5% expected growth. And as you know, in July, it was 3.3% global growth now. And there's been a number of shocks, from commodities shocks to a slowdown in the Chinese economy, to an expectation that the US interest rates will be increased, and what that means for the rest of the world. So there's a good mix of activities that are going on around the globe that directly impact on Africa. Just to give you some stats with regards to the performance of African stock markets in 2015 year to date, the FTSE ASEA Pan-African Index and the S&P All Africa Index are actually down 5.2% and 8.7% respectively year to date. This is an interesting statistic. 30 IPOs projected compared to 24 companies that raised 1.7 billion US in 2014. So we're actually expecting to do more IPOs this year. Already, 13 IPOs have been done. Nigeria Transcorp, JSC, Lodestone REIT, Novos Holdings, Virginia Active Morocco, Maroc, Egypt, Edita Foods Industry. Did I get that right? Ema. In Rwanda, Crystal Ventures, MTN, Ghana, Zambia Foods, ADB Limited. In Nairobi, the stock exchange itself demutualized and listed on the exchange itself. So there's some activity going on. In terms of markets that are performing, the BRVM composite index has returned about 14.8% year to date. That is an increase of about 1.8 billion US in market cap. Some of the larger markets like Nigeria, Egypt are struggling and haven't performed as well in terms of the indices. So with that said, let me introduce the panel today to give more context and address specific questions around what is going on in Africa today. We do have the CEO of the BRVM, Dr. Edo Amonuville, to my left. We also have the CEO of the Stock Exchange of Mauritius, Sunil Bedimadi. We also have Dr. Omran, the chairman of the Egyptian Stock Exchange, and Mr. David Grayson, who is the CEO of Albert Grayson. Broker-dealers and investment bankers that perform a lot of activities on the entire continent. I'll ask two more questions, and then I would open it up for the audience to chime in. Sunil, I want to come back to you. When you view liquidity and your efforts to drive liquidity in the marketplace, do you differentiate between primary markets and secondary markets?
Yeah, I think it is very important, Oscar, that when you look at capital markets, to have a certain amount of depth, both at the primary and at the secondary market level. Because what makes a market successful at the secondary level depends a lot on how easy it is for issuers and to raise capital at the primary market level, because this is what is going to drive in the future the secondary market activity on the exchanges. So it's a very fundamental, I think, for exchanges, but also for capital markets in general, to have a very broad and deep primary and secondary market. So in Mauritius, in fact, I refer to my answer to your initial question. We have been very successful over the last 3 or 4 years in terms of our positioning process of the exchange as an attractive capital raising, listing, trading platform for issuers. And what we've seen is that many of these issuers have turned to our market for listing their products, let's say in US dollar, because as a multi-currency platform, we can allow an issuer to list in US dollar, in euro, in GBP, in South African rand, but also in Mauritian rupee, raise capital in any of these 5 underlying currencies, list, trade, and settle in any of those 5 underlying currencies. So what we've seen is that many of these issuers, especially those that are targeting the international investors, they tend to raise the capital in US dollar. The money is not necessarily being raised in Mauritius. Part of that is raised in Mauritius, but you know, we're trying to become a sort of internationalized platform. So when you position yourself as an internationalized platform, the flows of capital need not necessarily be coming from the country itself. Part of it may be raised internally, but also part of it is being raised internationally, and that's what we've seen. In fact, since 2010, there's been nearly about $3 billion raised by all these international issuers that are using the Stock Exchange of Mauritius's platform. So to answer your question, I think it also relates to other capital markets or other exchanges in Africa. I think it is very important for us to internationalize our platform, in the sense that when there are IPOs, let's say in Egypt or in BRVM in Nigeria or in Mauritius, it is very important for us to be able to link our markets to the international capital flows, and that's where players like Oya Grayson, I think, are fundamental to this process. We need many more Oya Graysons to know about our market, understand the dynamism and the growth prospects of our issuers, of our countries, and try to get them to understand also that we do business in the way that can make them comfortable in terms of our compliance with international standards, be it on the trading and settlement side, that many of our markets ensure strict delivery versus payment. We are in compliance with IOSCO principles, with the World Federation of Exchanges standards. So I think there's been a lot of positive moves in Africa, but the story has to be told. And that's where I think I congratulate Dr. Amenouve for what he is doing, because that's the only way for people in the developed world who are looking for attractive investment opportunities outside of the traditional markets to understand what is happening within the continent in different levels and in different countries. As David said, it's not the United States of Africa. Each country has its own specificity and its own dynamism, but it's important for us to get the story out there.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think that if you look at the much bigger exchanges like the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and the Nigerian Stock Exchange, they're moving towards an internationalization, if you will. In Nigeria, for example, last year, we did an IPO that was a dual listing in Lagos and London to raise $500 million. Company Seplat, it's a $2 billion company. At the strike price, the demand was $750 million, and half of it was from Nigeria. Yeah. So you're seeing a lot more of that kind of activity going on, because it's important to drive, if people want to raise money, to actually be able to do it locally and internationally, and even locally, not just in your domestic economy, but across the continent. Yeah. David, let me come back to you. What regulatory improvements would you like to see to create more liquidity? And would you support an ASEA-led initiative to engage the private equity community to prepare a systematic pipeline and cohesive, coordinated ecosystem and environment for private equity exits as IPO candidates on the continent?
Good question, Oscar. Just before I answer that directly, following on what Sunil said, one of the things that the African markets can do individually is encourage your local issuers, company management, to travel to Europe, to travel to the United States to meet investors. Not only does it get them out to tell their story, it tells indirectly tells the country's story. And not enough African companies are visiting, except for maybe the largest, most liquid. Not enough of them get out here and visit investors because they don't necessarily understand the importance of doing that and how it adds liquidity not only to their company, but prepares investors for additional fundraisers and just brings more attention to the market. So I think that's very important. With regard to, I got off track, but with regard to private equity investors, there aren't that many private equity investors who exit their investments through IPOs. I wish there were more, because that would attract a lot of investor interest. I'm sure you wish there were more. But a lot of the exit scenarios are to a strategic investor rather than to the stock exchange. We work closely, actually, with the IFC, who invests along Pan-Africa and then does exit many of their investments through the exchange. But I wish there was more done through that either, and that's something that could be done individually or through something like the African Stock Exchange Association.
Thank you. Let me open it up to the audience. Comments, questions, by show of hand. Any takers? Okay. There's a lady here.
Thank you. My name is Joanna from Ashmore. Oscar, I know you haven't had a chance to give comments on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, but I was wondering if you had any comments on developments there, similar to other African countries. This year has been a challenging one for the market, but what do you see in the medium term in terms of the economic development or potential economic development and the impact on the stock exchange in general?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. So to put things in context, as you know, the Nigerian Stock Exchange is the second largest on the continent, offering equities, fixed income, and exchange-traded funds. And yes, it's gone through a challenging period this year. The market is down about 13 to 14% this year. But if you look at its performance in the last 3 to 4 years, in fact 5 years, you will see that on average, it has returned about 17% annually. The challenge is driven primarily from shocks in commodities, crude oil, and therefore pressure on the currency. And so what you add to that the political uncertainty around the elections, which we've now successfully come out with a new government in place. A lot of the investors took away their monies and wanted to be on the sidelines to make sure that you have political stability and that whichever government comes in has a clear path with regards to economic policy. So the new government is in place now. The president has said that he would be announcing a cabinet this month, and hopefully the economic team will be in place and will begin to make very clear the economic direction that the country will be going in. And that is very critical because as you know, we've had only monetary policy trying to address the currency shocks. For us at the exchange, we're very supportive of the effort of the government to plug leakages and to make sure that there is significant improvement in the security situation. We want to present ourselves as a platform that is supportive of the government and that will help to drive financing in building infrastructure, in making sure that the government policies are properly executed. The exchange is the largest platform for raising funds for the government. So we want to continue in that light. And in so doing, we're approaching the government to see if we can change the tax code to make it more attractive for companies to list and also more attractive for investors to participate in the marketplace. I don't know if that answers your question. Thank you.
Hello. Oh, here we go. Quick question just for all. What are your thoughts on the opportunity or efforts made to outreach to the diaspora to increase activity on the various African stock exchanges?
Okay, so can two diasporans, what?
Egyptians? Well,
So diasporans, I think two of the panelists can represent the panel. Okay, you want to go first?
yeah, I mean, it's a very important issue to increase your communication, to be able to attract the money from the citizens that are living outside the continent itself. I guess there is a huge amount of money, and even if I talk about the Egyptian exchange, I understand that there are around 4 or 5 million Egyptians. They are living in the Gulf area or they are living in Europe and United States, and it is very important to have some sort of communication between the stock exchanges and the people are living outside. I guess this could be done through the roadshow, through meetings like that. But again, you are quite right, because those people, many of them, they are wealthy investors, and there should be a platform, there should be a forum to done in an annual basis or semi-annual basis of how to communicate with these wealthy investors, because not only they will bring the money to the country, but also they can work as ambassador in the place that they are living to support and to encourage and convince others to invest in your country. So I'm not sure whether we are successful in doing that. We are trying, at least from the Egyptian Stock Exchange point of view, to be in touch with some of the people outside Egypt. But to be honest with you, I can tell that we are not as aggressive as we should do. And I'm not sure about the rest of African stock exchanges, but in reality, it could be a common issue. And you raised a very important question, actually, in which there is a huge amount of money sitting outside the African continent, and it could be, if it's well designed, is to attract some of this money to return back to the home destination.
Thank you. Second volunteer. Okay, Dr. Onyema.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think that is a very, very important issue for stock exchanges and for the BRVM. We are planning to have a roadshow next year in France, in Canada, and US to promote our market to the diaspora. And some of our state members are also working on the issuing of diaspora bonds next year, especially Cote d'Ivoire is working on that, and think that it can be a very important opportunity for the country to raise money from the diaspora to finance infrastructure in the country.
You want to go?
Yeah, I just wanted to add an idea. I think it's very clear that there are millions of Africans living in different parts of the world, and the good story is that many of them have done extremely well and are high net worth people living in all these countries. So if the resources that they have could be mustered for investments back home, I think this would certainly create a tremendous potential for our markets. But the question is, how do you crystallize this potential into a real vehicle that would be investing into these markets? I don't know, maybe the leadership has to be taken by some of these high net worth individuals themselves, setting up a sort of diaspora hedge fund, let's say, for investments into Nigeria on the Nigerian stock market or in other markets in Africa, because I think definitely the potential is there. But it's a question of how do you structure it. I think by going on road shows and so on, yes, you may touch, 10, 15, 20, 100, but that's not sufficient. The question is, how do you reach out to, hundreds or thousands of them, and how do you create the vehicle that would, then allow them to express their interest for the country? I think this is where the challenge lies.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. I mean, for us in Nigeria, the diasporans actually constitute some of the largest sources of flows into the country. And the government has recognized that and is doing a diaspora bond. On the stock market, 60% of market activity is foreign. And most of that foreign activity, other than the institutional money that comes in, is from diasporans as well. So it is a major source and a great question. Can we have one more question and then we'll wrap up?
Oscar, would you just excuse me before the question? Yesterday, this is the UN General Assembly, and there is a Sustainable Development Goals, and I think you would like to give a word about the role of stock exchanges as a sustainable stock exchange initiative, especially 5 of the stock exchange in Africa were attending a meeting yesterday, and it's very important to show how the stock exchanges can support this the Sustainable Development Goal through the initiative we have. I guess this is a very important
Yeah,
message.
thank you very much. The exchanges are supporting the United Nations via the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, which is a UN initiative that is supported by UNCTAD, UNEP, the Principles for Responsible Investment, and what's the last one? Global Compact.
Global Compact.
And you have major exchanges from around the world supporting this initiative. 5 exchanges from Africa were at the meeting yesterday to talk about ways in which the exchanges can galvanize their ecosystems to find sustainable ways of doing business and sustainable financing for these sustainable development goals. As you're aware, there are 17 sustainable development goals with about 169 targets. We've identified 4 that exchanges can play a critical role in, from equality in terms of gender equality, making sure that women are properly represented on the boards of directors of our listed companies, to appropriate sustainability reporting standards, to Umran, help me out here. I can't remember the other 2.
I think out of the 16 goals and 169 targets, the stock exchange has like a 4 dimension. You mentioned the equality. There is something about dissemination of information. There is something about the sustainable growth for the economy. I mean, there are 5 targets in which the stock exchange can show models for the listed companies of how to put the issues related to environmental, social, and governance aspects in their way of doing business. This is something called the ASEA reporting or ASEA indices, environmental, social, and governance indicators. And I guess it's as you mentioned, is very important because stock exchanges is not a place for trading only. Most importantly, it's a place to support the ecosystem. It is access point to financing the growth. It is very important to add to the growth rate of the economy. Not only the growth rate, but what we are talking now about the sustainable kind of growth rate and the sustainable development in which we became part of the United Nations initiative.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think we need to wrap up. It would be remiss of me as the president of ASEA if I did not make a plug for ASEA. ASEA is the Association of Securities Exchanges in Africa, 25 exchanges, doing great things to present exchanges as a platform to drive economic growth in Africa. One of the initiatives that we're currently working on is to link the sub-regional hubs together and present a much more deeper pool of liquidity for international investors. And our flagship conference, the ASEA conference, is in November 16th in South Africa, hosted by GSE. So if you're interested, please contact us. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's thank the panel.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.